Chapter 21 Madonna and Child. Prior to projection, Sunday, September 9th, 1979. At 8:35 p.m., I lay down on the left side after having contemplated various matters since 7:09 p.m. After checking the clock, the vibrations increased. I tried to take off without success. Extraphysical period. On the second attempt, I turned the psychosoma to the right, exited, stood up on the bed, and saw the extraphysical consciousness Aristina, my mother, who gave me an emotional embrace. I could clearly see her face and commented, "You are younger and more beautiful. You look like you did in that picture in the photo drawer. Your face is a little fuller." She smiled and made a reference to my son Arthur, who was sleeping in the next bedroom, which is situated between my bedroom and the office at the other end of the corridor. As I spoke about him, I felt an impulse to see him. He was now my target person. I immediately found myself at his bedside where, with Aristina's help, it was possible to pick him up in his psychosoma. Under Aristina's kind gaze, the little one became conscious, and I asked him if he wished to see how the skyrocket that we had talked about before going to sleep flies. He expressed the desire to try. I made a quick ascent into the open night air, holding Arthur in my arms. After flying up and down and back and forth in all directions over the ocean, all the way to Two Brothers Hill, with the boy radiant with joy, I made a temporary landing at one of the entrances to the unfinished construction of the Panorama Palace Hotel on the side of a nearby hill. I was examining Arthur, who was nude, by passing my hand over his back and body, when a youthful extraphysical male suddenly appeared, wishing to play with Arthur. Upon calmly asking this extraphysical consciousness to go away, he leaped with one jump over the half wall of the construction's frame, disappearing into the night in the direction of the neighbouring slum. Arthur was more or less lucid, but kept his childlike mentality. In a few seconds I returned to the apartment, leading Arthur towards his soma in his bedroom. I no longer saw Aristina. I felt vibrations indicating the presence of my dense body, and, just as metal shavings are attracted by a magnet, the psychosoma returned to the soma, and I awakened. After returning. Upon pressing down on the clock, the luminous indicator read 8:52 p.m. I hesitated a few minutes over whether or not to register the preceding events, thinking about the clarity of awareness before, during, and after the projection. Then I visited Arthur's bedroom and saw him resting peacefully. I searched the drawer with the photos to find the picture of Aristina taken in 1930 and confirmed the physical likeness. Elizabeth was in the living room watching television. She told me that she had last checked on Arthur at about 8:10 p.m. Arthur was now fast asleep. Unfortunately, due to the very personal nature of projection, it is not always possible to avoid boring the reader with family stories. What can I do? Observations. My initial preparations for a projection, in this case from the dorsal position, usually followed this sequence. 1. Place the feet apart, letting the soma completely relax with all parts in comfortable positions. 2. Rest the extended arms with hands open along the side of the soma or over the legs without crossing them. 3. Place the head in a position that does not stress the neck. 4. Maintain the face free of muscular contractions. 5. Close the eyelids as if to sleep. 6. Avoid the swallowing of saliva or the forceful respiration of air through the nose. 7. Through relaxation and without moving even a finger, reach a state of complete immobility or semi-lethargy. 8. Bit by bit, mentally cease to feel the soma, imagining that it no longer exists. 9. Have peaceful thoughts focused on the act of projecting, imagining the departure of the psychosoma from the soma. 10. Intensely wish to float over the soma or to roll the psychosoma to one side, depending on your preference at the moment. Chapter 22. Cosmic Communication. Prior to projection. Sunday, September 9th, 1979. Second sleep at 10:22 p.m. After registering the projection related in the last chapter, I lay down on the right side. Extraphysical period. Following a helper, we visited the house of a psychic who works in a centre on the same block near his residence. We checked on the possibility of the medium accompanying us outside the soma on a visit we were about to make to the centre where he works. We discovered that it would be impossible due to the physical and psychological conditions of the gentleman at the time, as he was still awake and busy with some household tasks. Does this kind of situation occur frequently? As we turned at the end of the block, after leaving the simple residence, we faced the closed entrance doors of a spiritist centre that, from the street, appeared to be dark inside. We entered through the door next to the table from which meetings were directed. The scene in the main hall was touching and appalling. More than 200 sick extraphysical consciousnesses in the worst conditions were being treated by male and female extraphysical consciousnesses dressed like nurses. In order for the sick to receive the benefit of energetic treatments, the nurses accommodated them in their promiscuity, clamour, and deplorable disorder as best they could. There were only a few persons temporarily projected from the soma in a silent group. They were withdrawn and, by all indications, praying along with the directors of the work. There were a few simply dressed females of humble origin in this group. Upon being led to the table by the helper, I was able to hear, then and there, some statements made by an intangible consciousness who temporarily coupled with my psychosoma. Helped by the concentration of the extraphysical team and the projectors, he semi-materialized himself in front of those present. Various groups of the sick consciousnesses backed away stunned, kneeling down, hiding their faces with their hands, or putting their arms over their heads as if surprised by the apparition or afraid of the power emanating from the visitor. The cosmic communication that this extraphysical consciousness made began with firm reference to God's mercy. It lasted perhaps an hour, not permitting me to catch the ideas due to my semi-lucid condition at the time. I perceived, however, that the extremely potent mental emissions made up of deeply realistic mental constructions and a substantial energetic magnetism were succeeding, little by little, in pacifying the wild, unstable crowd. Upon concluding a prayer in that environment full of suffering, the extraphysical consciousness, already entirely tangible, went to assist isolated cases, together with the extraphysical directors of that night's tasks in the spacious Spiritist Centre. I cannot forget the painful vision of the abnormal faces of the sick consciousnesses who were assisted, especially one case which the circumstances allowed me to better observe. The extraphysical consciousness had been a woman about 4½ feet tall, deformed and demented, with a massive abdomen, slender, crooked legs, and, in the middle of her grimy forehead, above the nose, an enormous, striking, singular, endlessly tearing eye. She was totally disturbed by the mental suffering caused by the sick environment's hypnotic effect. Putrid, fetid odours emanated from the sick woman, agitated by overlapping convulsions, instilling pity and repugnance. After attending the female Cyclops, who immobilized herself as if anesthetized, the extraphysical consciousness assisted a few psychotic postmortems, bid farewell to everyone, and dematerialized. The room was now a bit more orderly and tranquil. The extraphysical nurses began to leave with their patients. In a short while, the centre's environment would once again assume its usual characteristics. Still accompanying the helper, I left the locale to return to the physical base. After returning, the clock read 14 minutes past midnight. The memories came back to me quickly, and with them the irresistible suggestion to immediately write down the painful scenes witnessed during my almost 2 hours of absence. The soma felt similar to heavy clothing, a heavy overcoat with its pockets stuffed with lead. Observations. It is common for helpers to take advantage of available physical surroundings, such as empty centres and churches, when they are closed. There they hold assistance meetings for those in need, utilising the energies in these locales, which are built for that purpose. Many intraphysical attendants are requisitioned outside the soma to collaborate in such work. Chapter 23. Extraphysical Self-Examination. Prior to projection. Wednesday, September 12th, 1979, 8:35 p.m. I laid down on the right side for a second sleep. Bedroom temperature 80.6 degrees Fahrenheit. Good weather. I had gone to bed physically tired and sleepy at 7:43 p.m. after a day of intense work. Extraphysical period. I remained alert for a long time until the takeoff process serenely began. When I left the soma, standing over the bed, I gave a vigorous yank forwards and upwards, exiting in the direction of the window. I flew like a pilot ejected from the cockpit of his plane. It is like that. Sometimes in takeoff, the psychosoma seems to have a certain power of ejection. It was not just an instantaneous projection, it was an extraphysical escape. The satisfaction of relaxing once more in free flight, away from material limitations and the influence of gravity, was marvellous, perhaps due to my fatigued state when I had gone to bed. The state of expansion, plenitude, and freedom outside the soma brought me indescribable pleasure. How I wish at moments like these to contaminate others with this joy. I wish I could talk over every loudspeaker, radio, and television station to the whole world and tell them about this practical resource to achieve absolute inner peace that is within everyone's reach. I wish I could let all my friends and acquaintances feel this extraordinary condition of the expansion of the consciousness beyond dense matter. Feeling extremely light and free in mid-air, I exulted over the thought of remaining in the soma on earth. The gratifying possibility of flying filled me with a profound desire to offer myself as a genuine element of assistance to suffering and ailing consciousnesses, to be constructively productive in the extraphysical dimension, to somehow live up to the privilege of this liberation and ecstasy that repeats itself with each projection into space, into the ether, into the infinite, into all. In open space over the Atlantic Ocean, with the flowing movements of free flight, in a spontaneous choreography, I danced and sang a deeply felt thankfulness for the opportunity of being, albeit temporarily, lucid outside the dense body. As I had done in earlier similar instances, the act of thanking the multidimensional helpers tamed the counterproductive euphoria, returning me to a state of balance, self-criticism, and mental serenity. I did not notice the presence of any helpers, but felt the overwhelming, resonating inspiration to verify the morphological or anatomical condition of my psychosoma. This was my target idea. Stopping in open space, I passed the right hand over my left shoulder, confirming the presence of a dark, hairy birthmark, or my factory trademark, as they used to kid me during my childhood, being about 2.5 inches long and 7.5 inches wide, located on the left deltoid. This observation did not surprise me, as I had already verified its presence over a decade ago. The myopia I have had since adolescence, the permanent buzz in the left ear, and the scraping sound created by the narrowing of the space between 3 cervical vertebrae upon moving my head from side to side that have been with me since an auto accident in 1970, completely disappeared while outside the soma, facts that I had observed before, even during partial projections. Thoughts condition the characteristics of the psychosoma, which determines the form of the soma within biological laws from conception. The soma is a replica of the psychosoma, down to the smallest detail, including pores, fingerprints, and hair. As I considered that I was dressed in the pajamas in which I had gone to bed, I touched my thorax and arms and confirmed the thought. Next, after arriving in my bedroom, I performed an inspection along the lines of a clinical physical examination, attesting to the presence of the navel and all external anatomical parts, including facial features and genital organs. To conclude the physical inspection of the psychosoma, I raised the right hand to my back, head, and neck, and once again very closely examined the skin of the neck region and the silver cord. It again impressed me as being a combination of teeny, loose cords or fine, occasionally sparkling elastic strings, firmly attached to the psychosoma. The silver cord exhibits warmth, flexibility, and the texture of human tissue. It has a structure and nature closer to that of the psychosoma than to that of the soma. The energetic filament does not seem to stop at the skin. It gives the impression of entering the soma and establishing a deep connection with one or more vital centers. Could one of them be the pineal gland? How can such an apparently fragile structure have such a powerful flow of energy? While I deeply pondered the fact, as if engaged in an eternal monologue, I held the silver cord close to the soma and activated the return system by pulling on this appendage. In seconds, I was consciously diving into the physical body. After returning, my awakening was spontaneous. I had not suffered any lapse in lucidity when returning to the body. The soma remained on the right side. The clock read 9:48 p.m. When I left the bed to write down these notes, the soma seemed to emit vital energy like a big burning fuse, emitting sparks wherever I passed. Observations. Frequently, a state of tiredness and drowsiness predisposes the soma towards a temporary liberation of the psychosoma. This occurs because the cardiac rhythm slows down and allows the relaxation necessary for a voluntary projection. An effusive sense of satisfaction, in the same way that it provokes a temporary loss of the ability to reason, causes the projector outside the soma to lose the calm needed to maintain a peaceful coexistence with the silver cord. The projector must fight against euphoria so that the mind can utilize its ability to perceive events and make coherent decisions. The psychosoma is the director of the form of the soma within the parameters of biological laws, especially genetics. This is why the projector encounters it in the extraphysical realm as a true twin of the soma in every microscopic detail. However, it is the consciousness that controls all of this. In other words, the soma is guided by the mental soma, the seat of the consciousness, which respects the actions of biological laws. In the case of identical twins, for example, It is not that these relatives are beings of identical levels, evolutionary characters, and psychosomas, but rather that they are different extraphysical consciousnesses who are reborn along similar morphological lines, organized according to biological laws. Thus, the greatest physical similarities are found between identical twins. The consciousness is not permanently fixed in the soma, the holochakra, or even the psychosoma. It is a separate creation that resides in the mental soma. The shape of the psychosoma varies from one life to another, respecting and interacting with biological laws. The mental soma does not have a defined shape and is confined in the act of rebirth. Chapter 24. A District in Transition. Prior to projection. Friday, September 14th, 1979. Second sleep at 8:31 p.m. I lay on the right side. Temperature 77 degrees Fahrenheit. Good weather at 7:35 p.m. I began my mental and physical detoxification and energy emission exercises, briefly losing lucidity. Due to a rather hearty dinner, unlike my usual light meals, the helpers accelerated my digestive processes in order to prepare me for this night's projection. My stomach's fullness was eliminated in a matter of minutes. Extraphysical period. An evolved extraphysical companion sculpted the visual semblance of two extraphysical consciousnesses whom I had previously seen at some imprecise place. He commented on their conditions, explaining that I was going to visit a district in transition. I could count upon constant intangible assistance, including some probable energetic transmissions. Within a few brief moments, I entered an apparently peaceful garden with some extraphysical consciousnesses walking about, while others were seated or stretched out on some inviting grass. There were small, cozy environments with tables and chairs here and there among the lanes, trees, groves, stairways, verandas, short walls, and living room type areas, all in a natural setting. There were no dead or dry leaves anywhere. The atmosphere was quite comfortable and bright. My presence was noticed, and three extraphysical consciousnesses immediately came by to exchange thoughts, offering friendly greetings. It was clear that, although they were communicating through mental dialogue, telepathy, their native language was English. They wanted to know where I came from, if I was from Earth, and what I was doing and looking for at their colony. Trying to hide my projected state, I said that I came from far away and wished to know where I was. A healthy-looking youth, who had appeared in the helper's visual projection, came forward and explained, "You are in Samonta, but we want to know why you don't express yourself in our language. Where do you come from?" The solution was to say something to avoid stirring up a long list of questions. "I am from far away. I'm passing through. We speak Portuguese where I'm from. Where is Samonta?" The same consciousness counter-questioned me, by this time encircled by about 6 others and some woman with semi-lucid eyes. "Can you help me? I have a constant pain here in my head." In view of this request, the helper's recommendation came to mind. Let us concentrate. I moved away with the extraphysical consciousness and transmitted energy to him, focusing the emissions on the extraphysical brain of the suffering consciousness. I sensed the transmission of a great flow of energy that was not my own. The ailing extraphysical consciousness immediately recovered and stated, "It's gone. I'm better." He went on jubilantly, leaving the group behind. The remaining extraphysical consciousnesses began to comment on the event, and the situation permitted me to again ask the two closest to me the intriguing extraphysical geographical question, Where is Samonta? No one seemed to want to understand the query or explain it to me, perhaps because they were ignoring the question. Another peaceful consciousness with snow-white hair, who had been meditating while reclined on one of the bordering lawns, began to exchange thoughts with me. I will tell you. He walked towards one of the elevated short walls, and instantly a map of Brazil, Paraguay, and other countries and continents, including Africa, appeared, forming a large section of the world map. Everything was observed by those present. At the side of the three-dimensional configurations, the extra-physical consciousness projected a ground-level plan of extensive gardens and explained, "This is Samonta. It is here, in this direction." He drew a circle on the map, pointing to the Seychelles Islands near the African coast, indicating the extra-physical area over the Indian Ocean. Discreetly withdrawing to the place from which he had come, he slipped into his earlier state of meditation without even waiting for my thanks. At this point, due to the insistence of those gathering around, I had to show the area of Rio de Janeiro on the vivid map depicted on the short wall, revealing where I came from. Everyone looked surprised when other extra-physical consciousnesses arrived, and one of them, the second character whom I had seen presented in the helper's visual projection, stated firmly, "You live on Earth and speak Portuguese. Think calmly in English, if you can, and we will be able to understand you better. We are undergoing temporary treatment here." Accepting the suggestion, I began to slowly set forth my thoughts in English, addressing this personality by repeating what I had heard before, at the beginning of the projection. "You have great magnetic powers, and within a brief time you will go back to human life. Is that right?" The extra-physical consciousness smiled and was going to start a transmental dialogue because he recognized me, but two others, brought over by the one who had had the headache, came up to invite me to a more isolated place in order to speak confidentially. It was possible to treat a few more convalescing extra-physical consciousnesses. I noticed that I was basically serving as an intermediary channel for the invisible assistance being provided from another dimension by the helpers. I did not observe any ill consciousnesses with visible deformities or facial lesions, although there appeared to be a considerable number of mental disturbances in this small average sampling of the extra-physical population here, including repressed anxiety, concealed worries, partial amnesia, and one-track minds. I saw no one flying. The mental imbalances of the extra-physical consciousnesses, although attenuated by the hothouses of positive energies, must have disturbed their thinking capacity, transmental comprehension, and the feasibility of flight. Upon arriving at the gardens, I immediately identified the two extra-physical consciousnesses as members of a group of consciousnesses sent to treatment centers for cleansing work, as mentioned previously. I soon bid them farewell, as an inner transmission alerted me that it was time to return to the Soma. I made it clear that, whenever possible, I avoid staying outside of the Soma for more than 1 hour, my optimal flight autonomy, during my projections. I said that I would tell my human companions about the existence of the delightful extra-physical colony of Samonta, where they were staying temporarily for a period of rest. After returning, upon awakening, I noticed a slight cramp in the left hand. The clock read 9:46 p.m. The extra-physical events came to mind firmly, little by little. At 9 a.m. on Saturday morning, as I was typing the accounts I had written the night before, the gentleman I referred to in Chapter 15, from whom a few accompanying extra-physical consciousnesses had been removed, had coincidentally arrived at Rio de Janeiro and telephoned to make an appointment, ignoring all that had happened during his last visit. Observations. While projected, one experiences expanded psychic capacities, thereby facilitating the occurrence of paranormal phenomena related to projection, such as intuition or inspiration, premonition, precognition, déjà vu, remote viewing, clairaudience, self-viewing, past life recall, telekinesis, telepathy, psychometry, reading of energies, bilocation, etc. Chapter 25. Consecutive Projections. Prior to projection. Friday, September 21st, 1979. Third sleep at 3:57 a.m. After writing since 2 a.m. in the office. Phase of the moon. New at 6:48 a.m. The night was peaceful. It was not raining. I settled into the dorsal position, noticing that the helpers were present to perform energy exercises. After some time, intense vibratory waves enveloped me, and I soon fell asleep. Extraphysical period. I awoke while flying out of the office and into the open air over Ipanema, accompanied by a youthful extraphysical male, appearing to be the equivalent of about 8 terrestrial years old. While in rapid ascent, he mentally exalted the wonders of the sea at dawn. It was, in fact, a spectacular scene with a view of the nearby islands, a wisp of clouds in the distance, and the ocean stretching out as far as I could see. It was interesting to note that the perspective of the scenery appeared totally modified when viewing it from higher up. The Atlantic Ocean seemed to have expanded and become filled with lights. My range of vision became greatly enlarged, and the immense seascape spread out beautifully before me. The dark-complexioned boy, whose serene eyes conveyed radiant goodwill, began to comment on the natural healing energies that the sea offers, sick, intraphysical and extraphysical consciousnesses. He suggested that I enhance my extraphysical vision through my willpower in order to see with greater clarity. The vastness of the sea water, of the sky, and the spiral clouds actually expanded the horizon's boundaries, providing a broader view than if I had been aboard a jumbo jet. I thought I would have many facts to describe, in view of my encounter with this child, who had as much knowledge as an extraphysical adult. But an indefinable discomfort called my psychosoma to return to the soma. After returning. Upon arriving in my bedroom, abruptly entering the soma, and immediately awakening, I heard the unmistakable noise inside my head, characteristic of the sudden realignment of the bodies. This forceful sound, which I have heard so many times in repeated experiences, is difficult to translate into words and varies slightly each time. It seemed as though a can full of dried beans had been suddenly poured over an aluminium container, making a very sudden noise that sounded like "shiro" inside my head. The sound had a sonorous quality, with the "ro" part being strong and short. When I regained lucidity, I could still feel the up and down motion of the spring mattress, appearing to coincide with the spontaneous movement of my wife, who was lying at my side. The vibrations resulting from her movement had reached my soma, causing me to be deeply startled, and had been the cause of the urgent pull on the silver cord. Was the rapid arrival of the psychosoma perhaps due to the fact that I had been projected only a few yards from the apartment in a light altered state of consciousness at the time? Extraphysical period. In a few moments I rejoined the boy, this time in the office of my apartment, in a follow-up projection. He had brought along a middle-aged extraphysical male who looked familiar to me, yet I did not recall his name or where he was from. The extraphysical consciousness, although tranquil, was not fully aware of the surroundings. I attended to him while he sat in my office, facing the Atlantic Ocean. The boy insisted on seeing if I would remember the sick male while I was free from the restrictions of the physical brain. My recollection of his identity would then facilitate the transmission of energy to him due to the profound affinity between the two of us. After a few moments, I was able to recall the man's identity. I had met him a few times about 3 decades earlier, when he was a young student, perhaps in 1949. He had been among those attending the cleansing sessions in the Uberabensi Spiritus Center in Minas Gerais State, then directed by Major Nestor Cravo. I did not recall his name. Deep within me, however, I perceived his identity and was convinced that it was indeed him, now more mature and in the condition of an extra-physical consciousness. The boy then brought another man, perhaps more than 70 years old and apparently paralytic, who showed senility in his non-stop speech. The lad indicated with great satisfaction that the sick man had been his grandfather in his latest intraphysical period. The pleasant, well-dressed man, with a stiff white moustache, thin white hair, a small head, and short body, expressed enormous enthusiasm over the presence of his grandson, who was devotedly caring for him. The way he dealt with the sick men indicated that he would be a doctor in his next intraphysical life. My intuition revealed that the boy was a ward of Ascensão, an extra-physical colony located in the area over the state of Minas Gerais. This was the same colony where Tancredo, the boy referred to in Chapter 3, had been staying. After the youth attended the sick men for a few more minutes, I bid them farewell, returned to the bedroom, and experienced a routine realignment of the bodies. After returning, the clock read 5:31 in the morning. I had no time to write down this account, as it was almost time for me to get out of bed and go to work. My wife, after waking, listened patiently, as always, to my description of the 2 consecutive projections. The act of narrating helped me to retain the details of the events. Chapter 26. Investment Suggestions. Prior to projection. Sunday, September 23rd, 1979. Room temperature, 71.6 degrees Fahrenheit. I went to bed at 6:57 p.m. in the dorsal position. After a few minutes, I turned onto the left side. Extra-physical period. I became fully awake inside a large building in a district of a European metropolis. I was accompanied by an extra-physical consciousness who requested that I remain calm and be observant of the local surroundings. We passed through some well-furnished but empty reception areas and offices. In an outlying room, we saw an elegant and very respectable-looking elderly man who was busy with some documents at the door of an immense safe. In the next room on the left, a man in his 40s sat alone on a couch, apparently in intense concentration, with his eyes closed and his arms resting on the back of the couch. 2 other rooms to the right were occupied, one by a mature-looking extra-physical male and the other by 2 persons, all quite relaxed in chairs, seated in front of desks and completely absorbed by their own activities. Now having an overall view of the luxuriously furnished offices and still accompanied by an alert and tranquil extra-physical consciousness, I identified the thoughts coming from the minds of the concentrating gentlemen. I was shocked and was able to control myself only due to other surprises I have handled in the past. I quickly understood the nature and extent of the activities occurring in complete silence and without any assistance or support staff on this night shift between Sunday and Monday. These men were transmitting intense mental suggestions to certain other persons utilizing thought at a distance. The scenes in the psychospheres, auras, of the isolated men were unmistakable. One of them was concentrating so hard that his whole face was wrinkled up. As he did so, the purpose of their routine mental efforts became clear. They were trying to influence businessmen to make major investment decisions, probably during the next day. Astonished upon discovering the purpose of this telepathically transmitted hypnosis, I wanted to get a little closer to the man on my right, to the front of the couch where he was seated. A large photo of an unfamiliar grey-haired gentleman stood out from the numerous documents spread out on the desk. This was the victim. I was surprised to see the image of the potential client come to the surface of this long-distance suggestion technique that was more sophisticated and dishonest than I ever imagined could exist. This was a war of thoughts, with unimaginable repercussions in both worlds. It was contemporary voodoo in the hunt for money, with subtle, inferior purposes and devoid of any good intentions. I was informed that this was psychic exploitation at its worst, because its power was used against those who were unwary or mentally unprotected, typically the heads of enterprises or companies upon which thousands of people depended for their physical survival. Still stunned by the sight of the papers, the photo, and the ideas, and not wishing to accept the reality of these mental insertions, I went to view the two other rooms. Unfortunately, the same thing was going on there. The only difference was that the two white-collar workers in the thought-controlled chamber were concentrating together, calmly weaving mental currents with no break in rhythm, vigorously trying to modify the mental attitude of a single victim. The extra-physical consciousness at my side mentally followed my observations on the extent of human debauchery, where the most sublime resources of the energy of thoughts, capable of yielding cures and everlasting happiness, are subverted for the purpose of influencing businessmen in order to increase personal wealth, which is inevitably lost upon the death of the soma. It was explained to me that the atmosphere of these offices was a little heavier and more difficult than that of the ordinary business space, due to invasion by capricious, sick extra-physical consciousnesses who were very good at playing dishonest mental games and who assisted the hypnotists to manipulate those under remote hypnosis. These cohorts had been temporarily removed to allow us to peacefully and carefully examine the surroundings. The extra-physical consciousness commented, "In answer to insistent queries, we see here the natural obstacle to the widespread development of the phenomenon of projection. Can you imagine the projector who nourishes such intentions? The negative suggestions could have much more disastrous effects when applied directly. Nevertheless, cosmoethics cannot be fooled. The inevitable consequences may appear to be slow in arriving, but they always come. No one is exempt from being the victim of their own negative works. Could Mesmer, Charcot, and other luminaries in the history of hypnotism have ever imagined an operation like this, so highly systematized on such solid but decadent foundations? The secret and methodical character of the activities in this environment was a fact, and the seriousness of the enterprise unfortunately left no room for doubt. Lawlessness is being practiced, and it is going unnoticed. Worst of all, it is going unpunished because it is not within the reach of human laws, whose penal and civil codes still do not have provisions prohibiting infractions of this kind. Police organisations still have not awakened to this reality, being too burdened by common assaults to consider the improper use of the most powerful weapon available to criminals, misdirected thoughtings that affect those open to that type of influence. It is worth asking, what is the limit of the powers of the mind? What are the ultimate means that can be used in the struggle for personal interests? If carefully thought out decisions can be influenced by certain persons, what can be said of the effect that extraphysical consciousnesses can have on people's hasty decisions? I did not follow the events as they progressed through the night and into the morning. Nevertheless, who can tell whether any of these men, so dedicated to the trade of transmitting suggestions over a distance, would not, from their office or home, leave the soma in the middle of the night and directly persuade the unwary? It is possible for sick, intraphysical and extraphysical consciousnesses with bad intentions to consciously or unconsciously provoke considerable mental damage to those who have not cultivated mental discipline. This fact raises a myriad of political and social issues that, sooner or later, must be seriously considered by human organizations. It is for this reason that projection constitutes the most transcendent psychic manifestation, as it involves many sectors of intraphysical life. After observing that princely den of thieves for some time, I left the exquisitely furnished locale in a thoughtful, slow return to my physical base in the company of the helper. After returning, upon awakening, the soma was still lying on the left side. Within seconds, the events of the projection came to me in their entirety. Still shocked by what I had witnessed, I felt an invisible affirmation that I should register the projection without delay in order to illustrate extraphysical reality. I did so after verifying the time, 8:44 p.m. It was not possible to determine the time that had been spent in the environment I visited, but it had certainly taken place during the night. Observations. This night's excursion reminded me of news about the interest of powerful governments in the use of projection as a means of spying on other nations, including the temporary appropriation, copying, and subsequent return of secret strategic defense plans. I think that this is possible in the crustal dimension, coexisting extraphysical duplicate of the physical dimension. However, the question of transporting objects with consecutive dematerialization and rematerialization is extremely problematic when non-cosmoethical objectives come into play. I would never submit to such experiments in view of their purpose, as they constitute a nasty business for the experimenter. The preservation of the noble aspect of projection is fundamental to maintaining the projector's consensual balance and the quality of his or her extraphysical companions. Chapter 27. The Psychologist's Patient. Prior to projection. Tuesday, September 25th, 1979. Room temperature, 71.6 degrees Fahrenheit, with the use of the air conditioner, as it was up to 95.9 degrees Fahrenheit outside, being the first hot day after a period of cooler weather. One air conditioner was left running in the office, with the door facing the hallway open to the bedroom, thus attenuating the characteristic monotonous sound. I was called by the helpers to go to bed around 9:57 p.m. Using vigorous energy exercises, the helpers gathered, chased away, and assisted other extraphysical consciousnesses for about a half an hour. I noticed that some energies were even transmitted to my wife Elizabeth, who slept on the right side of the bed. I went to sleep in the dorsal position. Extraphysical period. Having successfully projected from the soma, I noticed a cleansing being performed with some inferior extraphysical consciousnesses wearing grim expressions. They were being retained by the helpers in the extraphysical environment of the physical base, my bedroom, where they hurled a continuous stream of blasphemies. After a few moments of preliminary activities beside a sinister-looking pair of extraphysical consciousnesses, the energetic density of the situation forced my strategic retreat. I quickly returned to the soma. I appeared to be a prisoner of a powerful net of energy. The sudden, intentional return to the soma from above allowed me to once again hear the peculiar sound of an intracranial noise, typical of the violent reintegration of the psychosoma with the soma. On this occasion, it sounded like the short, fast crack of a whip. The clock read 10:54 p.m. I turned the soma onto the left side and, having replenished my strength, proceeded to take off again. The separation of the psychosoma occurred instantly. The dark, fearsome extraphysical consciousnesses were waiting for my return into the improvised arena, anxious for continued energetic confrontations. After a while, the atmosphere became a little more serene, when some psychotic post-mortems were taken away for recovery. It was now time to return to the soma again, in order to replenish my energies and continue working. My return to the soma and peaceful awakening allowed me to recall some of the extraphysical events. The clock read 11:56 p.m. After a few minutes of mental and emotional revitalization, I lay on the stomach and left side of the face and began a new projection. I fearlessly went forward to finish the work at hand. The most pathological extraphysical consciousness of the group was awaiting my separation from the soma in order to engage in a direct dialogue. The completely unbalanced consciousness had the appearance of a 4-foot-tall woman dressed in a plain, wrinkled blue outfit. Her facial features reminded me of a parrot, with uncontrolled bloodshot eyes in their orbits, shimmering with indescribable anguish and the mentality of a spoiled 8-year-old child. She was unable to entirely control her movements. It was necessary to hold her with my hands and embrace her as if she were a child. With the assistance of the helpers, whom I could not see at the time, I tried to use a deep suggestion for her to sleep. After a while of serving as nanny and nurse, with spontaneous fraternal compassion inspired by the sick one, it was possible to induce her to sleep with her cadaver-like eyes still open. Then came the suggestion that I stand up and hold that consciousness for some time, until her extraphysical sleep took hold. In a short while, one of the helpers took the sick woman away. A few of the extraphysical antagonists tried to subvert the restraining vibratory system, but something suddenly happened that scared them, forcing their immediate departure. I then experienced a peaceful return to the soma. My night's task was over, creating an intense internal peace. Extraphysical assistance in the form of cleansing projections is extremely gratifying. After returning. Upon awakening, the clear, vibrant recollection of the sick woman's sad features, particularly the eyes, remained in my mind. I checked the time. 12:58 a.m. After this third consecutive projection, the helpers explained the extraphysical situation that had just transpired. The unhappy extraphysical consciousnesses had been attracted by my wife Elizabeth, who had been used as extraphysical bait, in order to help the mother of one of our son Arthur's friends. According to Elizabeth, the little girl was under psychological treatment at the recommendation of the school's authorities. Everything now became clear. The woman's sick extraphysical company had been coupled to the hyperactive child. After exchanging ideas with Elizabeth about the occurrences, I started to write them down. As I was registering this projection, I reaffirmed that all human gratification is insignificant in comparison with the benevolence of the helpers. Chapter 28. Opportune Advice. Prior to projection. Friday, September 28th, 1979. Third sleep. I lay down on the right side at 2:22 a.m. after brief energy exercises. The apparatus hanging on the bedroom wall indicated the temperature to be 75 degrees Fahrenheit, with variable weather and 75% humidity. This data is provided in consideration of those who wish to study the relationship between the atmosphere of the physical base and projective takeoff. Extraphysical period. I became lucid in the extraphysical dimension among several extraphysical consciousnesses who informed me that I would visit a distant extraphysical region. And it really was. After going through several different locales and ambiences, I reached the entrance to a colony where sick extraphysical consciousnesses are treated. After a while, a happy, energetic extraphysical consciousness, full of vitality, suddenly appeared in the area. I recognized him immediately as José Pedro de Freitas, the famous and unforgettable medium Arrigo. I was thrilled to see him. When I recovered from the very pleasant surprise, I was going to tell him of the latest news, such as the phone call from his brother Eli a few weeks ago, a documentary about his life that is being shown in the United States, and dozens of other subjects, when he quickly cut me off in his characteristic way. No, let's not talk about those things. I don't feel good talking about me. Intraphysical life is a little complicated. I want to talk about you. So, you are part of the pajama squad that goes around with Okra and the psychosoma. Come on, tell me about it. I tried to show him that I was an apprentice to the helpers in those services that required dedication and willingness to perform correctly, but he interrupted my elaborate mental dissertation, saying, "Waldo, you know I was told around here that you went flying around like a crazy man with your son, among other things. Let me give you some advice. Take this work seriously. Projections and physical effects are at the root of everything. I had many projections in my life, but there wasn't enough time to connect everything together. My life was very distressed. Don't be that way. Take it seriously. This is how we are able to learn more." Then another extraphysical consciousness came in to talk with him. I observed that he listened with patience and understanding. Appearing younger and thinner, Arrigo exhibited greater intelligence. He was not a patient at the colony, but an active extraphysical medical assistant. He hardly resembled the Arrigo who had died in an automobile accident years before. After retaking control of the conversation and making attempts to receive and retain the observations made by Arrigo, he appeared to want to conclude the interview, fraternally lamenting, "Well, I really wanted to fly with you to a beautiful place that I know, but, as you know, I can't. I'm on duty." We said goodbye. I am grateful to Arrigo and the helpers who made this unforgettable meeting of great significance and opportune warning possible. It had provoked much meditation and analysis of facts regarding errors of omission and the maximization of benefits to be derived from intraphysical existence and the exchange allowed by projection. After returning. Right after awakening, the recall of this night's serious and surprising projection came to me, strangely enough, without the signal of the energetic cord summons. The clock showed 4:13 a.m. In the bedroom, I could only hear the sound of the air conditioner coming from the office. Chapter 29. An Extraphysical Public Event. Prior to projection. Saturday, September 29th, 1979. I went to bed at 8:23 p.m., lying on the left side. Ambient temperature, 77 degrees Fahrenheit. Variable weather, with a relative humidity of 59%. Extraphysical period. I awoke before entering a sinister-looking city, accompanying an extraphysical consciousness who is going to someone's aid. I was visiting in the role of an observer, under the guise of an extraphysical consciousness. My psychosoma was denser, due to the low energetic pattern in this locale. I was wearing a bizarre garment, and the silver cord had been disguised in order to hide my status as a projector. Upon receiving a briefing on this projection, I realized that it was not the first time I had done this. I record previous similar excursions, including one that had occurred while living in Uberaba almost 20 years before. The tense, shadowy surroundings reminded me of scenes in certain comic book horror stories. One could see that many artists must have been inspired by similar cities in order to compose settings, characters, and plots. I could see preparations being made for a medieval public religious ritual where there were sick extraphysical consciousnesses. They had dense, human-like psychosomas with terrible deformities, aberrations, and imbalances, resulting in the total distortion of the psychosoma. All those present were piled up in unspeakable promiscuity. In order to enter the grounds through one of the immense arched doorways, reminiscent of ancient cities, those unable to fly, being in the majority, were being forced to march through a narrow pass in rows of two, before a company of guards who were screening the visitors at the gate. Under the arches, I looked attentively at the inscriptions, sculptures, and carvings of dubious taste on the main gate, which reminded me of an imitation of the Arc of Triumph in Paris. Each extraphysical consciousness had to identify himself by revealing his status and indicating the ideology he was affiliated with by pointing to one of the encrusted insignias. Some passed through, while others were taken aside by the huge guards, who were armed with spears to control the herd of humanoid beasts. The distressing spectacle inspired compassion for some and unbearable repulsion towards others. I paid customary homage to one of the huge guards whose shield bore a masculine effigy with an eagle-like nose and long face that, from a distance, suggested the profile of an English noble. I then received permission to pass and descend along the cliff towards the public square where the night's activities were going to be held. Upon crossing the square, I witnessed the epileptic-like seizures of some of the sick ones stretched out on the ground, who had come to be cured by the local healers in their group hypnosis. The preparations in the square struck me as being a parody of the manifestations I had witnessed in July of 1953 in Buenos Aires during an event honoring the memory of Evita Perón, whose large groups of sick people were brought on stretchers to pray and to receive healing from the Holy Woman. On that occasion, there were many sick people with Parkinson's disease in the flower beds, with a gigantic picture several stories tall of their political religious patron saint, there in the middle of Avenida de Mayo. Crossing the square that would be used for the public celebrations, I could see chairs, stalls, and long benches already half filled by those arriving. We looked for the crude house where an extraphysical consciousness anonymously performing work of renunciation and self-denial was temporary living. It is strange to speak of anonymous work of renunciation, but that was the reality of the situation. I do not have adequate words to describe the atmosphere of that sinister city. In the desolate and parched setting, one could see no ornamental trees or public water fountains, only dark, swampy water. There was no pleasant light anywhere. An inescapable layer of smoke filled the suffocating extraphysical surroundings. From time to time, one could see the confusion caused by a group breaking out in a tumult, causing the unfortunate consciousnesses with transfigured faces to run in all directions. The implacable vigilantes would always be found in the middle of the confusion. In these explosions of scorn, intemperance, and revolt, the most horrible expressions were shouted by the deformed extraphysical consciousnesses, sometimes appearing to be engaged in playful camaraderie. It was possible to hear decades-old Portuguese swear words that had fallen out of use in Brazil. I got the impression that this extraphysical citadel was not too far from Rio de Janeiro. Those present were speaking Portuguese, using old slang and expressions, and used outdated mannerisms. The majority of this population was not even able to express themselves telepathically, a capacity that is so natural for the consciousness liberated from the physical form. They were apparently only able to communicate by articulating words vocally, as though they were still human. The extraphysical consciousnesses in attendance lived with various other suffering consciousnesses in an area that, according to the helper who was beside me, was one of the cleanest around. Even so, it was in an indescribable state of camouflaged filth, exuding a nauseating mustiness that would disgust any average visitor. Moments before arriving at the square, where everyone was supposed to be, 3 squads of guards came to check inside the poor, run-down shack, which finally emptied as all the residents left to participate in the public event. The soldiers were hopelessly trying to impose silence in the pandemonium there as more people arrived. At this point, 3 pygmies, who must have been the secret agents of the authorities, appeared brandishing swords and proceeded directly with the formal questioning of all those present in the area. In moments, they were headed in my direction. I instantly sensed that I had been discovered as a clandestine projector. To escape, I resorted to a drastic recourse I was shown during the briefing before the excursion. I had to steady my thoughts and fly with all possible energy far away from the environment. I did so, and the pygmies were soon below me, looking up and indignantly shaking their swords at me in the grey air. I do not know why, but I felt as though the swords could have done me harm. In what way? I had had the same feeling when I saw the guards' spears. My upward departure from the locale was not easy. The flight was most difficult. The helpers stayed behind to carry out the remainder of the initiated task while I returned much faster than I had come. In an instant, I was being attracted towards the soma. It was like finding a life preserver during a critical emergency. It was worse than a nightmare because I had been entirely lucid. After returning, I immediately awoke, and as I saw the time, 9:54 p.m., the memories came to me calmly in their entirety. Perhaps no projector can avoid remembering such an experience. An energy transmission from a helper signaled me to register the projection. It gave me the impression of emitting life-giving energy in all directions. It had the effect of cleaning the environment from the energetic remnants of the viscous, harmful forces that insisted on remaining in the room. Observations. A few words about extraphysical flight. The brain of the psychosoma has neural circuits with kinetic memory or memory of motion. These memory banks organize, program, and execute extraphysical flight. Not only the preparation for takeoff, but also the types of flight, such as high altitude, long range, and rapid free flight. Lucid projectors often disguise their projected state in order not to embarrass others and to be able to perform tasks. They can be noticed due to the luminescence of the psychosoma, the act of flight, and their appearance. Projectors can also hide their silver cord. It is common for the projector visitor to switch off the radiant light of the psychosoma while in shadowy districts in order to appear to be in the same condition as the extraphysical inhabitants. The act of avoiding flight, where there are extraphysical consciousnesses who are incapable of flying, is another attitude taken by those aware of multidimensional reality. Assuming an opaque and a less pleasant extraphysical appearance when in an ambience of an inferior nature permits greater liberty and anonymity to the extraphysical consciousness when in extraphysical regions where this is warranted. Projectors can use the three resources mentioned above, as well as a masking of the silver cord, in order to appear an extraphysical consciousness when extraphysical circumstances require. No one comes to the intraphysical dimension solely for pleasure, and the same is true of projections. The extraphysical world of the projector presents impressive extremes of astounding beauty and horrid ugliness, attractive and repulsive aspects, sentiments of hope, and moments of tension. In conclusion, there are many people living in better conditions as humans than they would and perhaps will as extraphysical consciousnesses. How many and which of us? How incredibly right were Danchi and Swedenborg? The projection of the psychosoma represents a preparation for, or a dry run of, biological death and the upcoming multidimensional experience. Chapter 30. The Shape of a Ghost. Prior to projection, Thursday, October 4th, 1979. Third sleep at 2:11 a.m. Ambient temperature 73 degrees Fahrenheit. I had turned off the air conditioner some time before. I lay down on the right side. I remained completely lucid while in alignment with the soma. The soma was lying on its right side on the left edge of the bed. Extraphysical period. A pale, yellowish light appeared that illuminated everything, as if immense eyelids had suddenly opened over a pair of inner eyes deep within me. I clearly perceived only the upper part of my body, or rather, the extraphysical head, arms, and hands, along with my extended extraphysical feet, all together at the edge of the bed. The rest of the psychosoma had not manifested. I was impressed by the sensation of being a bodiless creation of smoke, filled with will and thoughts, like an immense intelligent amoeba in a science fiction story, and with more life and reasoning capacity than a soma of flesh and blood. Images came to mind of an anchored ship, planes tied down against strong winds, and of semi-materialized extraphysical consciousnesses during materialization sessions using ectoplasm, dense semi-physical energy. Upon clapping my white extraphysical hands, I noticed that they looked as though they were under gentle sunlight. With the form of the psychosoma partially composed, I felt the surface of the golden yellow carpet of my bedroom. Upon brushing the carpet with the palms of my extraphysical hands in order to inspect it, I recalled the floor beneath it, and at the same moment was able to observe the wooden tiles of the floor. After rubbing my hands on the wooden tiles, I saw a light emanating from everywhere, illuminating the pieces of wood that were joined to each other. I thought of further inspecting the physical installations of the room when an indefinable discomfort arose within me. I realized that I was too close to the dense body. I was still within the range of the more powerful influence of the silver cord, a condition that occurs when one is up to 13 feet from the soma. The psychosoma was on the floor, only partially formed. With the admonitory discomfort being so strong, it was better to return to the soma. All these thoughts transpired in only tenths of a second. I awoke immediately without any lapse in lucidity. I think that when operating from the psychosoma, while it is still in alignment with the soma, the mental processes of the extraphysical brain of the psychosoma give the impression of occurring at lightning speed. The partial formation of the psychosoma next to the soma was due to the quick takeoff of the psychosoma and the minimal emission of consensual energy. Where is the sensation of discomfort situated within this living fog? The appearance of the psychosoma is dependent upon the mental state of the projector. Illnesses and disturbances of the soma and the mind generally alter the psychosoma for the worse. A good state of health and extraphysical lucidity rejuvenate, harmonize, and improve the form of the psychosoma. I did not notice any extraphysical consciousnesses in the vicinity. After returning, I consulted the clock. It was 2:38 a.m. I was indecisive as to whether or not I would get up right away to make this entry. I chose to get up, and, after a few seconds, upon arriving at the corridor close to my study, the body still seemed to be fairly out of alignment, partially projected. This gave the sensation of walking in emptiness. I had to stop where I was, increase my lucidity to waking state level by willfully emitting waves of energy, in order to enable myself to go through the doorway of my study. Every time this occurs, I have the sensation that I am wasting a seething force that emanates from the soma. It might be better to immediately begin another projection, but I always worry about forgetting the extraphysical events that have just transpired. It is a fact that I almost always forget some part of a projection. For this reason, the solution has been to write the account in the moment and continue with another projection later, when possible. Upon trying to sleep again at 3:31 a.m., my wife, at my side, was snoring rather loudly. Not wanting to wake her, I thought it best to go to the living room, taking 2 pillows with me. I closed the curtains and the window, stopped the noisy pendulum of the clock at 4:14 a.m., and lay on the right side over 3 modules of a sectional couch. My head pointed towards geographical north in this new environment. 2 roosters crowed simultaneously in the dawn of Ipanema. Extraphysical period. In a few moments, I was once again lucid and outside the body, floating above the couch modules in the middle of the living room. It occurred to me to view my sleeping, dense body. Upon attentively examining my tranquil left facial profile, noting the closed eyes, a feeling of pity and gratitude arose in me for the apparatus before me. It seemed as though it belonged to someone else. It had permitted me so many experiences throughout my life. I now understood all the more how the soma is a useful instrument. It is always touching to see the inert soma as if the psychosoma were a mirror image, contemplating it with its emptied brain. At these times, it is the reflected image's turn to act on its own. This is the greatest triumph of mind over matter, the crucial experiment of being human. The contemplation of the defenseless soma sharpened my objective of observing and learning. Seeing one's own incapacitated soma is a doorway to self-knowledge. It is the first step towards one's inner self. Meditating on the enormity of my debt to this extraordinary vehicle, I found myself arriving at the conclusion: one day I will see it for the last time. Watching a movie or looking at a picture is quite different from observing your own dense body. The soma is the straitjacket of the consciousness, the prison of flesh and blood while in the intraphysical dimension. It is wrapped around you like a miserable corpse, an empty shell, a turned-off machine, or something of the like. Which is the duplicate of which? The soma or the psychosoma? Am I living and dead? This is a new twist on Shakespeare's to be or not to be. After a few moments of calm reflection, devoid of narcissism, a sentiment of gratitude for the machine prison that has let me consciously take leave of it so many times gave me the desire to touch the motionless face with the fingers of the right extraphysical hand in order to embrace myself. I touched the tips of my extraphysical fingers to my physical face and automatically slipped with incredible rapidity into the soma, completely returning through the side of the dense body. This is a repercussion that is difficult to avoid when one is projected very close to the soma because of the intimacy and strength of the connection of the silver cord while at close proximity. After returning. Upon awakening, I had thoughts of gratitude for the soma. I remembered the impossibility of telling the time, as the digital clock was in the bedroom. After a while, having lost all sleepiness and having completely awakened after 2 consecutive projections, I returned the pillows to the bedroom and noted the time to be 4:54 a.m. The hydrometer showed 68%. I began to register this second, small, self-induced projection that had taken place in the living room. Observations. The brain, the most complex of cellular organs, only stops functioning upon the impact of biological death. It has 2 fundamental and distinct states of operation. The human soma functions with the consciousness present in the waking state, during dreams, in ordinary sleep, and in other altered states of consciousness. It functions without the presence of the consciousness during a projection. There are 2 cases of empty brain. The consciousness can be projected outside the physical brain during a projection of the mental soma, in which case the psychosoma remains in alignment with the soma. The consciousness can also be projected outside the body in the psychosoma, in which case the mental soma and psychosoma will be in alignment. These states in which the consciousness is outside the brain or in the empty brain condition will call profound attention to medical researchers in decades to come. The comprehension of the workings of the coronal chakra, crown chakra, the energetic cord, and the mental soma are the keys to understanding the empty brain condition. Chapter 31. Recurrent Projection. Prior to projection. Wednesday, October 10th, 1979. Third sleep. I lay down on the right side at 3:55 a.m. after writing in the study for about an hour and a half. Temperature, 79 degrees Fahrenheit. Barometric readings indicated meteorological instability. Humidity, 72%. Extraphysical period. I slowly achieved lucidity in front of the covered electric typewriter sitting on the table in the study where I had been writing by hand minutes before. How had I gotten here? I was alone. It seemed as if this projection had resulted from an unconscious act or mechanical movement promoted by a series of actions performed during the waking state prior to the projective state, a case of automatic behavior. Before going to sleep, I had told myself that I would type in the morning what I had handwritten earlier at dawn, as I sometimes do. The subconscious mind suggested the action, and the suggestion was acted upon. I have observed that the consciousness can have spontaneous projections even when not undergoing shock, accident, or illness. As I contemplated the typewriter and sensed that I was able to see inside of it, as though the instrument were made of crystal, a satisfying thought came to me. I am projected! Here I go! Feeling at peace with life and thinking with great ease, I realized that I had actually been waiting for this occasion, having been feeding this location to my subconscious as a projective target. I was certain that I was not dreaming due to the liveliness, lucidity, and peculiar charm of the projection. The psychosoma, being dense enough to be exteriorized intact, appeared to be filled with energy. Flying quite rapidly out through the study window towards the Atlantic Ocean, this willful catapulting had thrown me forward in a headlong rush of thoughts. In a very short time, I arrived at the interior of a long hall in a deserted temple. I was aware of having been there before. I also recalled the extra-physical consciousnesses who had been present at this site a year earlier, receiving extra-physical assistance from the helpers. As I passed through the interior of the temple, I noticed that the front of the construction had neither windows nor doors. The hall, located on the second floor, had a large entrance on the left side, and another at the back. I had arrived through the entrance next to the right-hand corner. An old wish returned to me to read the inscriptions inscribed on the stones and ceramic pieces, but I was unable to do so. The walls were thick. The ceiling was about 16 feet high, and the room was about 30 feet long and 50 feet wide. The interior of the closed temple was clean and in good condition. There was no vegetation growing on the inside walls. The air was still. There were signs of humidity next to one of the staircases. I saw a painted figure of a black man with open arms and legs on one of the rocks. No extra-physical consciousnesses were discernible in the interior of the completely silent temple, which was clearly illuminated with an orange light. I was convinced that I was in Africa, in a dense jungle area previously unexplored by modern man. This visit was one in a series that I had made to that place over a period of time. This, then, was a typical case of a recurrent projection, or one that is repeated because a consciousness likes the location and develops a series of experiments with the intention of studying the details of the locale, exploring its history, and collecting data related to that district. Why? Simple whim? an emotional link, or a magnetic attraction to the place? I continued to contemplate the inscribed ceramics on this floor, feeling the gravitating energies of this environment, when the body's energetic call came and I re-entered the body from the side, moments later, to my great disappointment. After returning, I awoke to find the soma lying on its right side. I did not know how long the projection had lasted. The clock showed 4:36 a.m. Roosters crowed announcing the new day, and I awakened without suffering any lapse of lucidity. The brain was engaged in gathering the most minute memories of the flight. The joy resulting from this conscious projection persisted throughout the day. Chapter 32. Projections with Witnesses. Prior to projection. Sunday, October 14th, 1979. I went to bed at 8:25 p.m. Temperature 75 degrees Fahrenheit. Humidity 62%. I lay down in the dorsal position with feet apart and hands over the legs. Intensive energy emission exercises began through contractions of the chewing muscles and typical movements with the arms and hands under the guidance of the extra-physical consciousness, Jose Grosso. After a few minutes, another helper, not identified, resolutely transmitted the idea to me that as soon as I felt a hand on my forehead, as had already occurred on past occasions, I should try to keep my thoughts still and concentrate on the act of projecting. The helpers would then try to facilitate my totally lucid takeoff. After perhaps 40 minutes, during which I maintained concentration and the decided will to project myself, an invisible right hand appeared, resting on the center of my forehead, pressing the area between the eyebrows with the palm. I felt the energetic manifestations of the frontal chakra. I felt the vibrational state become stronger. I made a mental attempt at taking off, without using any physical exertion. The soma remained rigid regardless. I took off in a classic upward departure, leaving my inanimate soma covered only by a thin white bedspread. I floated up to a distance of more or less 13 feet above the soma on the bed. Extra-physical period. As I assumed a vertical position, the suggestion came to me to lay the psychosoma in the dorsal position once again. This occurred several times as if I were taking a repeated takeoff training test. At one point in that extra-physical lie-down, stand-up exercise, I looked for a better position above the soma and moved in order to be at right angles to the bed. On another occasion, I stayed in the opposite position with the head of the psychosoma beside the physical feet. During one of the departures, I felt the transition state of double consciousness, seeming to be partly in the soma and partly in the psychosoma, having some lucidity in both conditions simultaneously, predominating first in one place and then in the other, according to the location of mental focus. In fact, the consciousness never divides itself. However, one's perception seems to be double, or in two places at once. On the first takeoff, I experienced a brief moment of perfectly bearable discomfort due to the powerful vibrations of the process. In subsequent instances, no other unpleasant state occurred. Quite to the contrary, the event brought me an intense sense of satisfaction, seeming like an inner expansion and a deep sense of well-being. I now wished to see my target person. I wanted to see my wife, who was watching a television program in the living room. But the projector does not always succeed in going where he or she wishes. It was possible for me to raise the psychosoma over the bed 3 times, enjoy the sensation of being literally out of the body, and reach the corridor and the door of the living room. Then the powerful silver cord called the psychosoma back, as if its energy level was low. The silver cord behaved as though it were made of rubber, alternately stretching and returning to its original form. This fact demonstrated that the psychosoma remained within the area of the silver cord's vigorous influence for the duration of the projection. Evidently, I was working on neutralizing the energetic cord's sensitivity. The intervals between the departures from and the smooth re-entries into the soma allowed me to feel like never before, with exacting detail, the partial separations of the extraphysical legs and extraphysical arms that seemed to float as if they were pieces of light cloth, similar to fine silk, that occasionally received a gust of wind, being blown from side to side. The comparison of the psychosoma to small air balloons of light, fine material is quite close to the sensation that one experiences during projection. The first takeoff seems so simple and easy, but upon re-entering the soma, the situation becomes complex and it becomes more difficult to leave the soma each time thereafter. For the first time, the feeling came to me of being observed by a cloud of witnesses that piled up around me in the extended bedroom. It was as if it were a wide anatomy amphitheatre, where the guinea pig was being examined by dozens of extraphysical consciousnesses the way that students follow surgery classes through observation windows. This was confirmed later by helpers when they explained that the extraphysical consciousnesses were united in research and study, striving for the future development of their personal projective capacity. They were observing my experimental departures and returns to the body, paying attention to the details of the process. This is why my extraphysical liberty had been restricted by the silver cord, which consistently pulled the psychosoma back to the physical base. This confirms the news about the intention of the more evolved extraphysical consciousnesses to intensify the practice of lucid projection throughout this planet. The soma resembled the long bark of a tree trunk that merely filled up when the psychosoma re-entered it. Who can express that sensation fully? One can ask, fill the dense, compact, massive, continuous and organ-filled body with what? Nevertheless, it fills all of it, molecule by molecule, cell by cell, millimeter by millimeter, in a complete coexistence and interdependence. In my first projection to the door of the living room, my visual capacity improved. The orange, extraphysical brightness of the ambience, which was physically dark, intensified from an extraphysical point of view. Every time I went through the closed bedroom door leading to the corridor, both the bedroom and the corridor seemed to be much larger than they actually were. Next to the left wall of the corridor, which was usually empty, I saw an extraphysical object about 32 inches high and 28 inches wide that looked like a piece of cloth-covered furniture. Could it have been an extraphysical accessory? The third time I was projected in the corridor, after repeatedly going back to the soma and returning again, as if practicing stretching the silver cord, I saw a calm extraphysical consciousness about to enter the bedroom of my young son Arthur, who was sleeping. I was going to approach it when the soma called me irresistibly to return. This time it was not possible for me to leave the soma again. I returned to the soma from above. This imposed return occurred because, while returning in the dorsal position, my mouth had stayed open, causing me to snore. The noise that was produced had interrupted the projection. I tried still another takeoff, but upon moving the physical head, I received the mental suggestion to get up and make this record. After returning, the clock showed 9:42 p.m. It is interesting to note how the duration of the consecutive projections seemed to have taken longer than they actually did. Perhaps this was due to the intense extraphysical activity during the whole period. I remained lucid from the time I went to bed until now, and the act of awakening was virtually dispensed with. Observations. By far the most difficult and impressive part of projection is the moment of lucid takeoff from the waking state. There is no anemic or psychic phenomenon that provides a greater impact. It is the one event able to provoke modification of scientific, moral, and religious points of view, and has deep, far-reaching effects on anyone's knowledge, opinions, education, customs, and beliefs. Upon experiencing the lucid takeoff from the soma, generations of teachings are humbled, centuries of civilization are reduced to dust in the mind of the projector, and mountains of prejudice lose their meaning. Through personal experimentation, one dismisses all tiresome arguments. The result is peaceful certainty. The experience of finding oneself projected with strength and confidence, free from the restrictions of the soma, in the same places where we shower, eat, sleep, and otherwise live while in the soma, is indescribable. It is an invaluable experience, no matter how many times it occurs, and constitutes an important preview of the unavoidable transition of biological death, the final projection. With this preparation, the ghosts and nightmares of the extraphysical dimension vanish forever. Chapter 33. The Donors of Life. Prior to projection. Wednesday, October 17th, 1979. Second sleep at 9:02 p.m. Temperature 77 degrees Fahrenheit. Humidity 65%. I lay down on the left side. Extraphysical period. I was fully lucid, following behind 3 extraphysical females as they entered an enormous extraphysical institution in a monumental building with thick, closed doors. It was dark there. This institution is located somewhere in the crustal dimension, close to human areas, and perhaps above the troposphere. The ambience gradually improved as we went down various deserted halls, opening, passing through, and closing 3 doors in succession as we went. All this occurred while in near darkness, immersed in absolute silence. The third area we reached had a much friendlier feeling, being filled with a tranquilizing light. An impressive spectacle began just after the group entered. In the immense room, resembling an impeccably clean nursery with a high ceiling and white beds, dozens of women began to sing an adorable chant of happiness that began with a vibrant refrain. Sister souls, here we are, the donors of life. The marvelous collective song prayer, a mental dialogue of pure emotions, was sung by the extraphysical females of indescribable beauty. Their image comprised a picture difficult to describe. They were dressed in white, the majority of them simply sitting on the beds in the environment, which was crisscrossed with multicolored images. Energy surged out from the eyes, thoraxes, and hands of the singers. These surges of energy became more intense moment by moment, synchronized to the rhythm of the chant, creating an awesome scenery of multifaceted reflections. Finally, an abundance of sapphire rays poured out profusely in all directions. I almost began singing the enchanting melody that instilled an indescribable sense of well-being and euphoria in all present, the extent of which perhaps only these females could appreciate. These non-human voices expressed the most elevated feelings. The energies were irresistible. I felt like becoming a child once again and allowing myself to be overtaken by the refrain of the lullaby. It seemed like spring within the walls of the extra-physical construction, where the illumination gradually increased as the voices became louder. For the first time, I contemplated a crowd of beautiful women whom I had never seen before, true translucent Madonnas and angelic beings, without having the slightest thought of sex. Questions arose within me. Who was who in this assembly? Which were extra-physical consciousnesses, and which ones were projected? Were some of them pregnant? The rain of luminous effects did not allow me to perceive the difference. An explanation was transmitted to me. The extra-physical consciousnesses on the beds were preparing for their own rebirth and would eventually become mothers. The anthem of praise to motherhood was being sung by all, including many projected women who would receive others as their children in intraphysical life. There were only female extra-physical consciousnesses participating in the grand chorus, in a celebration of the mothers that would receive the daughters and who would themselves become heroines of motherhood in the near future. This organization works to renew the more somber areas of the undeveloped extra-physical dimensions while simultaneously preparing for upcoming intraphysical lives. I was sincerely surprised to find myself in this extra-physical work group composed of and directed by several profoundly feminine extra-physical women. They were deeply involved with the sentiments of motherhood in an institution specializing in the matter. The elevated nature of the ambience transformed the extra-physical nursery into a sanctuary divided only by the bluish flames. The chant that was being repeated would have brought tears of joy to even the most insensitive individual. My emotional state did not allow me to recall and faithfully report the indescribable lyrics and melody, the eagerness of the feminine chorus, the energetic waves produced by the subtle bodies, the sonorous tenderness spread by the voices, and the changes of the colors in the prodigious rain of lights that rained down from above. It was an unimaginable siren's chant that was being sung. It was impossible for me to hold back the tears of joy brought on by the sweetness of the voices that soon provoked the admonitory discomfort of the call to return to the physical base. Finding myself in a state of exaltation that was nearly impossible to tolerate, I was not able to recall all the details of the extra-physical events. It was a shame, because I have always wanted to know in which conditions the pregnant projector carries, along with her, that consciousness who is a candidate for intraphysical life. After returning, the psychosoma entered the soma from the side in an imposed return. As I awoke, the eyes wet with tears, I could still hear the chant echoing in the twilight of the bedroom. The clock showed 9:57 p.m. Observations. Just like the emotionalism I experienced in the above projection, one can experience small, harmless extraphysical shocks that can provoke an emotional reaction in the beginning projector. Some examples are passing the extraphysical hand through a physical object, passing through walls or humans, observing one's own inanimate soma up close, seeing one's psychosoma reflected in a mirror, quick takeoffs from the soma, hearing the intracranial sounds related to a sudden return to the soma, meticulous examination of the silver cord, expansion of consciousness and the visual perceptions, seeing oneself projected in a partially formed psychosoma, sensing the exact moment of the loss of respiration, free flight, extraphysical euphoria, encountering a deceased friend or relative, suffering an attack from a psychotic post-mortem, experiencing transcended time-space continuum with superlucidity, and others. The level of the above extraphysical events is always determined by the quality of the projected experiments. When I insist that the projector avoid emotionalism and mysticism while executing projective tasks, I am not recommending that he or she turn into a cold, insensitive individual without emotions, feelings, or affection. I am, personally, quite disarmed by the sweetness of the mature consciousness, the simple jest of a child, the sight of a beautiful landscape, the contemplation of a work of art, or a passage in a musical play. The truth, however, is that, in the extraphysical dimension, an emotional state of mind has always proven counterproductive to extraphysical observation. Chapter 34. Influence of a person. Prior to projection. Saturday, October 20th, 1979. New moon at 11:24 p.m. Second sleep at 10:05 p.m. I lay on the stomach and the left side of the face. Temperature 75 degrees Fahrenheit. Humidity 66%. Extraphysical period. I began to awaken during an upwards takeoff through the back while I was trying to adjust the position of the soma. I returned to the soma and then instantly took off again. I immediately noticed a male extraphysical consciousness. He was no one whom I knew. He appeared to be about 50 years old, with light brown skin. He was short, quite lethargic, and seemed to be trying to settle down inside my apartment to go to sleep. Young Arthur had been disturbed by his presence and had called his mother repeatedly since he had gone to bed at 7 p.m. As I came face to face with the man, still not fully lucid myself, I got the impression that he was a harmless extraphysical consciousness with no specific intentions. I saw several people through the window, at a distance, in the living room of an apartment on a high floor of a nearby building, sitting happily at their table, as if they were having dinner. Astonished by the change in the perspective, the clearness of the features of the neighbors' faces left me certain that I was projected. I suddenly became more lucid. Soon after approaching the sleepy consciousness, I noticed that he was actually an intraphysical consciousness. I tried to wake him up with these thoughts. "Hey, my friend, we are in a projection. Wake up. Go home." He had a well-composed human form. He was dressed in pants and a sports shirt and continued to exhibit a vague, distracted look, not seeming to understand anything. one can see that even the extra-physical somnambulant can mentally create his own clothing, so as to not be projected in the nude. My only recourse was to take him outside with me in an attempt to waken him. Firmly using all my mental force, but treating him like a novice to extra-physical reality, I took him, saying, "Look how I fly like Superman." My flight with my projected cargo was short, difficult, and brief. We flew out of the window and returned immediately. I went out of the apartment again, this time alone, to see what would happen. As I left easily this time, several extra-physical consciousnesses who knew me emerged from various places. The projected man watched my flights and finally disappeared next to the closed window of the living room while he contemplated the locale in a disorientated fashion. High up from where I flew, I was certain that he had left, and I relaxed. A lucid but transfigured and pitiful-looking extra-physical consciousness approached me to make an extra-physical attack. I flew away with that consciousness adhered to my psychosoma, gliding over the N.S. de Paz Square, until we reached the driveway of a residential garden at the border of Rodrigo de Freitas Lagoon. There, I left it with another extra-physical consciousness that had appeared next to a green wall. I made no comment. I did not see the sleepy, projected consciousness who must have come from one of the apartment buildings in the neighborhood, where his soma doubtlessly remained sleeping. I sensed the intangible presence of the helpers, particularly at the point when my extra-physical vision improved, as well as at the door of the lagoon side residence. I quickly returned to the soma. After returning, I examined the clock. It was 10:16 p.m. As usual, I had almost completely lost sense of time during the projection. I consulted my wife, who confirmed that the projection had lasted 5 minutes. She was able to calculate the projection's duration as she had gone to see our son, Arthur, in the next room right after talking to me. I was able to recall the projection in its entirety as I awoke. Observations. Once again, having to deal with consciousnesses that disturbed the extra-physical ambience had helped my projective capacity. These cases act as a kind of catalyst, stimulating one's extra-physical perceptions. The helpers know what they are doing when they let the projector solve certain problems in the projection by himself. These lessons serve to stimulate initiative and nimbleness in the tasks performed while outside the soma. The act of looking at the event in the distance served to increase my lucidity in the extra-physical dimension. In my projections as a youth, I had failed to observe that heightened visual capacity stimulates the further awakening of the projected consciousness. This represents a recent realization and is a result of a set of projections in series. What attracted the unidentified projected intraphysical consciousness to the apartment? We can see from the night's occurrences that one can be projected in the condition of a somnambulant or zombie acting as a crash projector. In this state, like that of the daydream experienced in the waking state, one becomes profoundly self-absorbed to the point of not realizing what is happening in one's immediate surroundings. To what degree does the tendency of being a crash projector predispose one to behave in the same way even after discarding the soma upon biological death? The projector never gets lost, always eventually returning to the soma through the action of the silver cord. He always awakens when he or she wishes. There are psychological and physical characteristics that contribute towards the profile of the ideal projector. Ironclad will, interest in new things, curiosity, lack of religious, scientific, and social conditioning, a rational and non-mystical temperament, patient nonconformism, calmness when relating to others, a good memory, studiousness, humanist interests, demanding of him or herself, dynamic but self-controlled, introspective with mental discipline, physical self-control, capable of advanced relaxation. The finishing touches on the ideal projector are a singular sexual partner, use of a single bed for projective experiments, always lies down in the dorsal position on a springless bed, performance of projective experiments before midnight and 4 o'clock in the morning, in the second half of the night's sleep. Low cardiac frequency, not worried about the next day's issues. I have tried to include at least some of these characteristics or tools of the trade in my personal makeup, a task that has not been easy. Chapter 35. Mental Automatism. Prior to projection. Thursday, October 25th, 1979. Third sleep, in the dorsal position, at 12:34 a.m. I went to sleep alone with the bedroom door shut after switching off the air conditioner. A little while earlier, I had left my wife, who was lying down in our son's bedroom. He had come down with an ear infection for which he had received some medication. Temperature 77 degrees Fahrenheit. Humidity 60%. Fair weather. Extra physical period. I awoke little by little in the bedroom and found myself, still half asleep, heading towards the bedroom of my ailing son. He was my target person. It is common for the projector, once outside of the soma, to head straight for the place where his or her concerns are focused, in an automatic continuation of the actions performed before going to sleep. Upon reaching my son's bedroom, it occurred to me that my wife should go with the child into the apartment's living room, as it is larger and would be more comfortable for the sick little one. I attempted to communicate my thought to the two of them. In a few minutes, I was in the living room when my wife walked in carrying the child and set him down on one of the couches. I witnessed their presence in the living room for a few moments and then went back to the bedroom. Upon returning to bed, the psychosoma did not immediately re-enter the soma. The psychosoma remained lying on top of the soma, as if it were resting in a peaceful sleep at a height above the soma of about 24 inches, like a captive, stationary balloon attached to the soma. I did not notice any extraphysical consciousnesses in the apartment during this projection. For a few moments, I experienced a more or less coherent mixture of illusion and reality. I eventually slid into the soma and woke up. After returning, the soma remained in the same dorsal position in which it had fallen asleep. I gradually recalled having seen my wife and son go into the living room. I got out of bed in order to find out what had actually happened with a great sense of curiosity. Everything was confirmed. My wife was in the living room with the child, who was now lying on one of the couches, crying. Upon asking her, she informed me that she had gone to the living room with the little one 20 minutes earlier. The clock now showed 1:02 a.m. Elizabeth also told me that it had been Arthur's idea to move to the living room. For the first time in that apartment, both spent the better part of the night in the living room. Observations. As usual, the projection allowed experimental confirmation of events experienced firsthand while projected in the psychosoma. It is interesting to note that my concern regarding my son's physical condition had caused many actions performed while in the extra-physical dimension to appear to occur in slow motion. I had also displayed attitudes and mannerisms foreign to my temperament. Profound lessons can be learned from the above facts. Earthly concerns prevent the achievement of full extra-physical lucidity due to undisciplined thinking habits. I had already made this observation some time ago during other projections. A fixed dominant concern had kept other extra-physical facts from being registered in my memory. The dorsal position favors the occurrence of sleep outside of the body. The psychosoma separates from the soma and floats above it in a parallel position. Extra-physical sleep works in conjunction with the projector's technical development, allowing him greater mobility within the reduced parameter of the silver cord's strong attraction. The little one, who was not quite 5 years old at the time, was able to receive my telepathic suggestion to move to the other room. Up to the physical age of 7, we demonstrate a greater psychic sensitivity to the extra-physical dimension. If I was able to induce a response to the telepathic suggestion sent to my son while in an out-of-body state, others can do the same. This can also be done with negative intentions, and herein lies the explanation of the cases of morbid intrusion affected against individuals. This unfortunately corroborates the veracity of the negative investment suggestions reported in Chapter 26. Projection is a fact that expands science and religion's scope of influence, enabling those interested in doing so to strike out at the structure of governments. The lucid projection of the consciousness can function in an incredibly powerful resource against which no reasonably effective defense has ever been established, and no one can prevent citizens from sleeping. The projection of the consciousness outside of the body constitutes an instrument more powerful than the hydrogen bomb. It is fortunate that cosmoethics and the helpers supervise the projective development of all. Chapter 36. A Winged Caravan. Prior to projection. Saturday, October 27th, 1979. Temperature 78 degrees Fahrenheit. Humidity 69%. I went to bed at 7:22 p.m. I performed energy exercises for about 15 minutes and then assumed the dorsal position. I then received the telepathic suggestion from a helper to project myself. The strong rhythm of the drums of the samba school in the nearby Morro do Cantagalo noisily penetrated the closed bedroom. Extra-physical period. I became lucid as soon as the psychosoma took off. I felt it necessary to straighten out the soma. I quickly returned to the soma and opened the legs, placing each one on top of a pillow. Throughout this adjustment, the arms did not move, and I did not perceive them. It was as if the soma had no arms. I took off once again, this time with a helper, Tao Mao, whom I had known for a long time. It was he who had given me the message prior to the first takeoff. He is an expert on multidimensional activities. He is a supreme mesmerizer with a profound knowledge of psychophysiological issues. He has been my friend since we met through the Casa do Cinza in the city of Uberaba 2 decades ago. Tao Mao explained that we would meet up with a multi-dimensional team that was going to assist persons during a certain human regional celebration. We flew across a vast distance. The speed of the trip did not allow a detailed observation of the scenes and environments past. Soon, we stopped in a rural area in the middle of a field planted with what appeared to be rice. The field was in the foothills of a mountain. It was interesting that the atmosphere appeared to be calm. I concluded that I must be in a distant country, where the seasons and time zone are different from those in Brazil, as night had already fallen over Rio de Janeiro. I waited with the helper for the arrival of the assistential team. I was instructed to go and pay fraternal respects to the leader of the extra-physical consciousnesses, introducing myself as a member of the projectiology team. Moments later, I was ecstatic to perceive an approaching cluster of consciousnesses looking like shining, low-flying birds coming in the direction of the hill. There is no human event that compares to this indescribably majestic spectacle. It was impressive to watch them land in an orderly and silent manner, as if it were a procession of pilgrims, or dressed like lamas or simple monks wearing slightly luminescent hoods. They were magnificent with their radiant psychosomas. As I walked towards them, on Tao Mao's generous urging, a strong consensual force descended from above. We advanced towards each other with open arms, in a fraternal greeting, having a wonderful sentiment of peace. We were all under the influence of the incessant torrent of energy, which emanated from an indefinable source. After greeting and embracing the extra-physical consciousnesses at the head of the winged caravan, who had now removed their hoods, I could get a close look at their oriental eyes and snow-white hair. They emanated a pale golden glow that shined over the field, which was populated with perhaps 100 of Tao Mao's friends. I felt an extraordinary transfusion of energy coming from the extra-physical consciousnesses. Their penetrating, luminous gazes indicated that I should proceed up the hill. It was possible to fly at high altitudes in this area, but I was only gliding some 26 feet above the ground while climbing the sprawling mountain to a construction similar to a border monument. As I approached, it was possible to see some people gathered around the structure, many wearing wide conical black hats. I noticed illegible inscriptions on the monument and a faint internal illumination when I finally reached it. The location was overflowing with visitors. I was able to tell that I was in China. Various extra-physical consciousnesses observed the caravan glide up the hill a few yards off the ground. The place appeared quite similar to Hong Kong, where I had visited more than a decade before. The extra-physical consciousnesses attended a few moments of the solemn proceedings that were taking place on the hill. Then they gradually dispersed to perform assistential work that was being organized in small teams. These teams were to work in a studious manner in the intraphysical dimension. It became clear to me that extraphysical assistance occurs everywhere, and that lucid consciousnesses congregate in the most diverse extraphysical regions in order to work towards furthering evolution. I left and passed by a house that was close to the other side of the hill. I observed a boy who was playing with an instrument he had in his hand. I passed through the house, saw his mother working in the kitchen, and left through a rustic gate that opened to the fenced yard. I went down a path that passed through several trees, and, now in full flight, wheeled myself to glide at a higher level. It was now time to return from the projection, and I soon arrived alone at the physical base. After returning, upon awakening, the soma, which was in the dorsal position, with its spread legs on top of pillows, felt like was made of steel. As I moved the arms of the soma, I heard the apparently dehydrated fingers make crackling noises. While the entire soma was stiff, it was immersed in a pleasant shower of powerful vibrations. As I awoke, I recalled the extraphysical events in their entirety and realized the need to record the events. The clock showed 8:57 p.m. Chapter 37. The Resounding Voice. Prior to projection. Thursday, November 1st, 1979. Temperature 75 degrees Fahrenheit, when the local air conditioner was switched off. Humidity 60%. Fair weather. I went to bed at 7:30 p.m. and lay in the dorsal position, physically relaxed. I immediately began energy emission exercises. Extraphysical period. I became aware that I was projected as I left the apartment with the target idea of finding a place with switches in order to try turning lights on and off. As soon as I had the idea, a resounding clarification echoed close by, as if it were inside my head. It addressed the fact that when we think, we create. I heard, "There is a difference between physical objects and the creations of your mind. This bag of toys, for example, is a mental creation." Close to my hand, a bag appeared. It seemed to be full of toys, like the bags used by Santa Clauses at Christmas parties. You can pick it up and throw it. If you so desire, the noise of the bag hitting the floor can also be created, but it all represents a creation of the mind. As I picked up the bag, I thought it would make a noise. As it hit the cement floor, it made a tap sound. The voice continued. The physical objects you see are real and are outside of your soma. Let's see if you can sharpen your extraphysical vision. At that moment, it seemed that everything instantly obeyed the thought. My extraphysical vision became quite amplified, and I had the desire to move further away. It is necessary to be aware and gradually create extraphysical reflexes in order to better control the psychosoma while outside of the body. I could see a wide door in an apparently deserted, dimly lit street. I wanted to go through the door and immediately found myself doing so. I was now on another street, next to a large warehouse similar to those in the dock area of Rio de Janeiro's seaport. Now gliding and totally lucid, I discovered a few light switches in the dark warehouse. As I neared them, I again heard the explanation. You think that you switched the light on. It seems to you as though you have, but you really haven't. Try to observe. What you think of happens because the will desires it to be so. but the will is only able to affect the extra-physical dimension that you are in right now, and not the intra-physical dimension that you are seeing and are appearing to touch, but are really not affecting. Upon sharpening my extra-physical attention so as not to compromise my perceptions, everything happened as predicted when I attempted to move the switches. I firmly felt the movement of the switches on the wall. It seemed that I had touched and switched them all into the on position. However, the lights did not turn on. The action had merely been simulated. The resounding voice said, "Do not concern yourself with moving physical objects. In order to do that, you would need to expend a lot more of your energies, while your extra-physical body is in a much denser state." I was not able to see or thank the owner of this resounding voice at any time during the projection. Only with greater experience is the projector able to discern when he or she is in fact seeing physical objects with clarity, and when he or she is adding his own morphothocenes based on his perception. Thought is an extraordinary, forceful, creative resource. If the projected mind thinks that a detail is missing in an object, it can immediately add it, including it in its perceptions. Gliding down the street, I reached its end and saw several people walking on the sidewalks in the distance. As I glided on, invisible to the pedestrians, I received a suggestion to return to the soma. I awakened immediately upon returning. After returning, the soma was still in the dorsal position. The clock showed 8:27 p.m. I got out of bed to write down my clear recollection of the profound comments made by the resounding voice. Observations. We can see that conscious projection infinitely expands the boundaries of reality. A whole new world, larger than the physical one, has been discovered and awaits exploration. Simulation of action, as illustrated above, frequently occurs when one is dreaming while projected in the psychosoma, or, in other words, when in the transitional phase between a common dream and a conscious projection. Chapter 38. Inspirational Assistance. Prior to projection. Friday, November 2nd, 1979. All Souls Day. Third sleep at 11:17 p.m. Temperature 73 degrees Fahrenheit. Indirect air conditioning. I lay on the left side. Upon going to bed for the first sleep of the night at 7:11 p.m., extensive energy emission exercises were performed, including a lucid takeoff of the psychosoma that remained in the close proximity of the soma for quite some time before returning. It seemed that a more extensive preparation was needed for upcoming projections. Extra-physical period. I became lucid beside a helper, who explained the night's tasks. This time we were going to experience an extended excursion to various distant places, taking into account the schedules of human activities. The helper did not geographically identify the places where we would be going. It would be important to maintain an alert mind and good powers of observation in order to be able to later make note of the extra-physical events. Priority was to be given to the registration of more important events. Excessive attention to detail has a negative effect on the accuracy of the recollections. It was in fact a long voyage, similar to a few that I had experienced before. I have summarized the principal events experienced given the natural limitations that affect the process. At the entrance of a building in its final stages of construction, the extra-physical consciousness who was leading the way explained that a vocational school that would accept hundreds of students was being installed. The building appeared to have 4 floors. The top one was a vast recreation area with ramps and a gymnasium, all protected by high walls. The lower floors were equipped with areas for technical work and looked like machine shops. The essential attribute of the school appeared to be the extra-physical preparation of the environment, taking into account the future human workers. The helper introduced me to the assistential team that would be responsible for the extra-physical monitoring to be performed once the school was fully operative. The extra-physical consciousness who had inspired the undertaking of and lent his name to the project worked alongside the others. They were preparing the environment with the dedication of church caretakers, cleansing the extra-physical environment, provoking intuitive inspiration in the human workers, and setting up local lines of defense, among other things. They were establishing an invisible foundation that appeared to be more detailed than the floor plans drawn up for the physical institution. After visiting the school construction, we went on to look at various types of factories in several distant locations. One factory in particular stood out as it had placed an emphasis on the minute details of the multi-dimensional services that were being implemented in the organization. I somehow felt that it was very distant from Brazil. I was astounded to see the degree of intraphysical and extraphysical monitoring going on in the different work areas, some of them active at that time. I could see that the surveillance and security systems were networked throughout the various key areas, all of which were being continuously monitored by the omnipresent gaze of closed-circuit cameras connected to a central room equipped with ample viewing screens and around-the-clock vigilance. Panels of monitors showing images of all workstations were mounted on the walls. The extra-physical consciousness explained that the zealously prepared physical precautions reflected only a small fraction of the enthusiasm of the extra-physical counselors who were in charge of preventing physical accidents as well as external interference by shadowy consciousnesses upon the unwary workers. In this way, they would prevent disasters that could bring unpredictable consequences. Our exploration continued. From the community power plant to the huge food processing plant supplying a massive population, from an apparently insignificant school still under construction to university laboratories, from a backyard factory to an industrial park. It all demanded the silent dedication, the tireless, steadfast protection, and the tenderness and inspiration of evolved extra-physical consciousnesses. Leaders of large physical establishments can be absolutely sure that they never work alone, even though their boardrooms may appear deserted. Extra-physical consciousnesses are everywhere, minimizing problems, smoothing out rough edges, inspiring workers, and moving things in a fraternal direction. There is an extra-physical personnel department in every large establishment on the planet. If this were not the case, the number of problems and accidents in business establishments would increase geometrically to terrifying proportions. There are tasks everywhere for the extra-physical consciousnesses that works on the planetary crust. The assistance provided by evolved extra-physical consciousnesses can be felt from the noblest programs down to the most humble and apparently uncivilized human activities. well-intentioned human collaborators arduously work in all conceivable areas and deserve assistance in order to minimize any setbacks they may suffer. It was impossible for me to hide the thoughts that came to mind of, among other things, the huge slaughterhouses that sacrifice animals for human consumption, the powerful armament and munitions factories dedicated to the production of police resources and the sustaining of wars, which have spread throughout the planet like never before in human history, and controversial nuclear power plants that, in spite of allegedly existing for the safety and comfort of the population, have caused long-time dissatisfaction and discomfort to persons throughout the world. This illustrates the current evolutionary level of human population. Everything is under the control of the basic directives of constantly wakeful, multidimensional workforces. Workers should always trust in the presence of inspirational extraphysical assistance. To be a part of a community service team is always to evolve. Through this participation, we acquired talents and perseverance through our efforts, resulting in lasting accomplishments. All great personalities at the forefront of human thought have punched many time cards during several of their previous lives. The well-established 20-year-old factory did not appear overnight, nor was it created without inspiration from the higher spheres. In the roots of every great tree of human progress runs the sap of the silent, anonymous abnegation of extraphysical teams. To reflect upon and understand humans with their contradictions, paradoxes, crises, struggles, and sacrifices made on the path of inner growth seems always to be one of the more difficult consensual accomplishments. Everyone who is reborn participates in human life compulsorily. All who participate are inevitably burdened by human needs, many of which appear to be diametrically opposed to each other. The responsibilities and the challenge of living righteously while inside a vehicle of flesh and bones, among other humans, is ever increasing. As we left the last organization, where workers were in full activity, a psychotic post-mortem approached the helper, and could not be ignored due to its demeanor. The psychosoma of the extraphysical consciousness had large, bright red marks throughout. Its hair appeared to have been combed for the occasion. The forehead, face, arms, hands, and legs had large, blood-colored blemishes on them. Judging from the tenderness with which it was attended, I could tell that it had worked in the establishment some time ago. Its condition was symptomatic of a pathology of the mental soma. A subtle intuition informed me that its condition was a consequence of exposure to atomic radiation while in the physical body, a condition that had continued beyond biological death. After observing the ailing extraphysical consciousness, I began the lengthy return to the physical base. After returning, as I opened the eyes while under a thin bedspread, the soma lying on the left side seemed frozen with the peaceful rigidity of a cadaver. Fragments of the extraphysical events came to me, maintaining the consistency of various thoughts, judgments, and sensations, as though I had just finished watching a long movie. It is very difficult to have total recall of the multifaceted events experienced in projections of long duration at long distances. The sharpness of the images of scenes and personalities encountered while projected is always very impressive. I will never forget the faces of certain workers who were interviewed that night. The clock showed 2:27 a.m. The projection had lasted more than 3 hours, without any sensation of time having been compressed. A light rain continued to fall over Ipanema. After calmly recording the events witnessed, it was 4:31 a.m. I was not able to go back to sleep again. Chapter 39. Instructive Journey. Prior to projection. Friday, November 9th, 1979. An atypical day. Temperature in the bedroom, 75 degrees Fahrenheit. Relative humidity, 55%. Second sleep at 2:04 a.m., lying on the right side. It had rained that evening. Intraphysical state, final stages of convalescence from colitis, still under medication, no fever. I had performed brief energy exercises with the soma earlier in the dorsal position, while still in the waking state, after doing some work in the living room. These included self-energization while coupled with an extraphysical consciousness. It was now just after midnight on Thursday. Extraphysical period. After some 40 minutes of concentration, a rapid projection occurred. I emerged with the psychosoma in the horizontal position, floating above the soma and oscillating slightly as if it were a feather or a soap bubble in mid-air. After a few brief moments, as I tried to stand up, the soma caught me with an energetic tug of the silver cord. Once more, I heard the unique intercranial sounds that seemed like a short creak made by a cabinet door closing with difficulty. As I had always observed, the extraphysical sensations were very sharp and vivid, although much more delicate than their intraphysical counterparts. The speed of the violent re-entry broke the projective trance quite abruptly. I then awoke outside the soma, between two young-looking extraphysical friends in the multidimensional team. Moments into our instructive journey, we were entering an area surrounding a large city that was clearly not Rio de Janeiro. The higher-ranking extraphysical consciousness made reference to the difficulty of flying over certain urban areas that appear to possess geomagnetic currents that make the process of flight extremely difficult. This may have been due to an increase in the weight of the psychosoma, particularly in the case of a projector. I recalled that the psychosoma, even though it is more subtle and does not breathe air, is still slightly material or physical in nature. It has been stated that it should weigh about 1/1000th of the weight of the soma. So a person weighing 154 pounds would have a psychosoma weighing approximately 2.5 ounces. The soma is referred to as the human body, as it is denser, but it is still a vehicle of manifestation of the consciousness, as it presents the silver cord, even when inanimate during a projection, as well as presenting the aura and psychosoma while the bodies are in alignment. Also, when one discards the soma while passing through the first death, the holochakra or energetic body is not yet completely discarded. In this state, the psychosoma remains fairly dense, retaining a varying minimal percentage of energy. Words do not always faithfully represent the reality of a situation. The helper, wanting to illustrate the difficulty of flying while in this condition, indicated that I should climb up a tree-covered hill on which I saw a few castor oil and other plants. I climbed the hill with great difficulty. The psychosoma felt very heavy. It was as if it were filled with rocks. What is the influence of gravity in this case? As I reached the top, the extraphysical consciousness commented mentally in a good humor. "And now, would you like to descend flying?" Neither my companion nor myself wished to take the risk, so we went down in a low-level glide. What would be the consequences of a flying descent for the psychosoma? As I left the base of the hill, I observed various canals dividing the streets and surrounding area. Some of them had lighted streetlights on their banks that reflected off the surface of the water. Upon passing in front of a residential area, I saw water gushing out at several spots in the middle of the asphalt, suggesting the existence of broken water pipes. The leading extraphysical consciousness decided to wait for the repair crew in order to avoid a greater calamity in the locale, because the principal junction in the network feeding the whole area was located not far from there. Moments later, repair crews arrived and went straight to work. Two extraphysical consciousnesses instantly established a kind of energetic defense encircling them. They went as far as inspiring one of the workers, perhaps the foreman, by placing one hand on top of the head and the other before the frontal chakra, transmitting ideas to him. Minutes later, the water stopped gushing out. A small number of extraphysical spectators followed the repair process as it unfolded. The asphalt was not going to be immediately repaired, but the critical danger had been contained. The same two extraphysical consciousnesses called me to leave. As we glided away from the area, various other extraphysical consciousnesses commented on our exit. The lead extraphysical consciousness requested that we not engage in mental dialogue. A little later, we entered a colonial-style house where a respectable-looking gentleman of about 55 years of age was totally absorbed in the massive volume he was reading. The leader of our group chased two psychotic postmortems away who had been beside him. Upon approaching the gentleman, the extraphysical consciousness endeavoured to impart some constructive suggestions to him regarding the topic that he was studying. I observed that the man was mentally immersed in a volume of criminal law. The case he was studying concerned a victim with a knife wound in his back. In the gentleman's thoughts, I saw images alluding to perceived death, premature burial, similar precedent cases, a theatrical play, and difficulties in the trial. Several volumes lay on top of the lawyer's desk. It was late at night, and I noticed that the room had a pleasant ambient temperature. Eventually the man got up, apparently with the intention of taking a drink of some beverage in the back of the residence. There was a car in the garage and a guard dog sleeping in the inner patio. At this point, the helpers thought it best that I return to the physical base. The legal case was not discussed between us, and I did not ask about it, maintaining my usual discretion. One can see from this night's events that the tasks undertaken by extraphysical consciousnesses are infinitely diverse. After returning. Upon waking up in the soma, which was lying on the right side, I recalled the extraphysical events in a fragmentary but consistent and connected fashion. The clock showed 3:27 a.m. Heavy raindrops drummed on the cover of the air conditioner. I could occasionally hear the echo of cars passing over thick metal plates on some nearby street under construction. Chapter 40. Evolution in Group. Prior to projection. Wednesday, November 14th, 1979. Second sleep at 9:08 p.m. Lying on the right side. Ambient temperature 77 degrees Fahrenheit. Indirect air conditioning coming from the study. Humidity 65%. Fair weather. Extraphysical period. I was perfectly aware of being projected when I tranquilly appeared among several extraphysical friends of mine. They had all been spiritists in intraphysical life and were amiably exchanging ideas over tasks on Earth. Some of the more relaxed ones were playing, while others were telling intermissive jokes or jokes about the intermissive period, extraphysical intermission between intraphysical lives. One of the stories, related telepathically by an extraphysical consciousness having a full head of grey hair, referred to the extraphysical beauty parlour. Most consciousnesses go through this beauty parlor when they return to the extraphysical dimension. There are true mummies automatically resuscitated into young bucks in the rejuvenation parlor. A more experienced extraphysical consciousness mentally told me seriously, "You can be sure that projection is a capacity inherent in everyone. It is a reality accessible to anyone with some degree of discipline. The ability to control the projection of the consciousness depends on one's ability to control their own thoughts, judgments, wishes, emotions, motivations, and affinities." Someone made a comment about the intraphysical team that was preparing to meet with an extraphysical team that would accompany persons to a debate beginning the following day in Rio de Janeiro. The debate would bring journalists and spiritist authors together from all over Brazil under the auspices of the Brazilian Spiritist Federation. Extraphysical consciousnesses began arriving either before or along with the humans that would speak at the debate. The fraternal gathering had a cordial extraphysical atmosphere. I was requested to visit a dear friend. I left the gathering with 3 other companions. Our arrival at this other area, also in the intraphysical dimension, was met with a great deal of fraternal celebration. One extraphysical consciousness, who was already there when we arrived, referred to the various types of existential programs that were assigned to individuals during their series of intraphysical lives. There are groups that fly like an eagle. Others go by the book. Still others live to punch time clocks, and so on. At that point, the extraphysical consciousness W got together with C, B, E, M, and others, some of who were related due to their existential tasks in physical life, having been involved in the same mission during physical life. First initials were used here at the recommendation of the helpers. In this unrepressed atmosphere, devoid of mysticism or backwardness, I requested something I might be able to take with me upon my return to the Soma. They all implied that Euripides Barçanufo, my great benefactor since childhood, was present in order to transmit some ideas to me. Concentrating while shoulder to shoulder with me, he expressed his thoughts on evolution in group in more or less the following terms. The withholding of ideas should be observed and considered in our relationships with others. We have all been in and will all return to the intraphysical condition. When we appear in a human family as a father, mother, brother, or sister, we need to fraternally accept to live in this family together with the balanced as well as the unbalanced consciousnesses, the calm as well as agitated individuals, the studious and also the negligent ones, the intellectuals and those less brilliant, the easygoing fellows and those who are more difficult to get along with. We are encouraged neither by life nor by nature to shut out those individuals needing the most extraphysical assistance, even though they may not meet our standards. On the contrary, these companions are almost always the reason why we are called upon to be reborn into specific conditions. The natural order of life dictates that we must not exclude these individuals, but rather go forth together with them. Similarly, we find others with whom we have been specifically petitioned to exercise true fraternity and cooperation. This necessitates that we not cast them out, but instead work to motivate them and foster their greater understanding. For the sake of spiritual truth and fraternal love, it is imperative to join and not divide. No one is reborn to evolve with someone by chance. The pathological thosenes of our comrades can reflect upon us. No advances in the climb to the top can ever be achieved by taking shortcuts. Evolution, whether we like it or not, as well as being an individual process, is also inevitably a group process. Sometimes it is difficult to understand the mechanics of destiny, but it arises, aiming for the improvement of the consciousnesses in group. The process of self-evolution does not allow us to forget these individuals who have been left behind. No one is allowed to ascend to the more advanced dimensions carrying memory lapses in the depths of the consciousness. We evolve together, rising up hand in hand and fly into infinity in flocks. I attentively tried to record the message. I was soon told to return to the physical, which I did. I awoke immediately, recalling the message mentally transmitted by Euripides, whom I thanked profusely. After returning, I awoke and consulted the clock. It was 10:04 p.m. My wife soon opened the bedroom door and prepared herself for sleep. Observations. One can never be sure what will happen in a projection. Nevertheless, there is always a strong correlation between the profile of one's intraphysical life and the events encountered while outside the soma.